Hello and welcome to Changing What's Possible, the Disability Innovation Podcast brought to you by Cerebral Palsy Alliance Research Foundation, or CPARF. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and this season we are excited to bring you extraordinary stories about how disability, technology, and innovation come together. Today we have a few guests joining us. First is Kara Allanach, Director of Product at SpineX, a startup company in our 2023 Remarkable US Accelerator Program. She'll be talking more about SpineX in the first half of the episode, and in the second half, you'll hear from Jessica, Van, and Annika Oldham. Annika has cerebral palsy, and she and her family will be talking more about their experiences with SpineX and how products from SpineX could help them and many others. So I'm looking forward to learning more about SpineX today. So Kara, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we are looking forward to getting into the details, but to start off with, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm Director of Product for SpineX right now. I've been involved in science and technology research for about 20 years. I started off as a researcher in the lab where I was working on kidney transplant rejection. And I was lucky enough to be in a place where I had the latitude and the opportunity to follow my interests. And I found myself gravitating more and more towards business administration and clinical project management and spending less and less time doing lab research. So I moved from working in the lab into working in university administration. And that's where I developed skills in things like intellectual property, contract negotiation, and managing large research programs and helping researchers to develop applications for government funding. And in 2020, I was first introduced to the world of disability tech startups, and I fell in love. It was a way that I felt that I could make use of all of these skills that I'd been developing in order to build something that could make a real difference in people's lives. And finally, all of these pieces fell into place when I found SpineX. I have a granddaughter who has CP, and watching her grow up and face the challenges that she has dealt with made me wish for a better treatment. And I believe that the technology we're developing at SpineX has the potential to make a real difference for people with CP.
I think that is so cool. And I love that your background combines both this research and administration side. And you mentioned that in 2020, this was sort of your first introduction to the world of disability tech startups. What happened and what made you decide to pivot your career at that point?
I had a colleague who's a serial entrepreneur himself, and he had been working with some disability tech companies, actually through an organization called Praxis in Vancouver. And he had some companies that needed some assistance in market research, and he asked me to help out. And I took on just a side consulting contract, and I found it was just a whole new world that I didn't even know existed. And I wanted to get deeper and deeper involved in it.
Oh, very cool. So let's talk about SpineX next. Kara, can you share more about the history of SpineX and all of the research that led to the company being established?
So SpineX comes out of deep neuroscience research. About 50 years worth of research has gone into where we are today. Our co-founder, Dr. Reggie Edgerton, set out to study the restoration of movement after spinal cord injury. And at that time, the spinal cord was believed to be just a conduit where signals would be transferred from the brain to the body. And Dr. Edgerton was able to show that there's actually more to the story and that the spinal cord can be involved in learning and can even mediate some functions without direct input from the brain. So he was able to use electrical stimulation to train rats that had complete spinal cord injury to take steps on a treadmill. And that was a great breakthrough. About 15 years ago, our CEO at SpineX, Dr. Parag Gad, joined Dr. Edgerton's research group. And he realized that the rats that were involved in the electrical stimulation studies also had improvements in their bladder function. And that led us down the path towards working on improving functions such as bowel, bladder, and sexual function in people with spinal cord injuries. And then when it comes to cerebral palsy, just through some collaborations SpineX had, we realized that there was a huge unmet need for treatments in cerebral palsy, and that CP also involves a disconnect between the brain and the spinal cord. So because of that, SpineX decided to look into whether or not this treatment could have a beneficial effect in cerebral palsy. And we found that it does. And so moved ahead into developing a treatment for cerebral palsy.
So then, Kara, can you tell us what is the mission for SpineX?
Our mission at SpineX is to improve the quality of life for people living with neurological conditions through the use of non-invasive neuromodulation.
Very cool. And I think that is a big mission. There's a lot of work to be done in this area. And for listeners who don't necessarily have a background in this area, some of these words might be unfamiliar. So to help everyone get on the same page, can you first explain what non-invasive neuromodulation is, Kara?
So neuromodulation, just to start there, is changing nerve activity through the targeted delivery of a stimulus. And that stimulus can be pharmaceutical or it can be electricity. Some examples of neuromodulation that people might be familiar with are deep brain stimulation for tremors in Parkinson's disease, or vagus nerve stimulation to control seizures in epilepsy, or implanted spinal cord stimulation for chronic neuropathic pain. So all of these are examples of how neuromodulation is being used today. But all of these examples require surgery to implant electrodes or wires into the body, as well as stimulators, kind of like a pacemaker, so that the electricity can get to the desired target nerve at a high enough dose without causing pain or discomfort to the user. So what SpineX has done that is different is we have developed special waveforms and carrier frequencies that allow us to deliver that same targeted stimulus to the nerves in the spinal cord, but without surgery. We are able to use electrodes that are placed on the skin over specific regions. By doing so, we're able to deliver that stimulation without causing any discomfort to the person receiving the treatment.
Absolutely. And I think this non-invasive component is one of the things that really sets SpineX apart. And it's really important because you avoid a lot of the risk that's involved in these surgical procedures. Something like deep brain stimulation is not something that you go into lightly. There's potential side effects and a lot of risk involved. So I think that's really one of the amazing things about these products.
Absolutely. And in the trials that we've done so far, we haven't seen any negative side effects, and it definitely gives it the potential to be a treatment that can be used maybe as an intermediate step before someone would need to go into considering a possible surgery. So it really does have a lot of promise.
Absolutely. And I'd like to talk specifics about these products as well. I know SpineX is working on 2 different products, one called SCiP, Spinal Cord Innovation in Pediatrics, and one called SCONE, Spinal Cord Neuromodulation. And a quick disclaimer, SCiP and SCONE are investigational devices and are limited by federal U.S. law to investigational use only. And the FDA has not yet reviewed the safety and effectiveness of SCiP or SCONE. And we know that SpineX has not yet determined the most effective method of timing for therapy, and it's currently investigating these parameters in ongoing clinical trials. But let's get to the details here. Let's start with SCiP first. So, Kara, can you describe what this product looks like and how it works?
Okay, so SCiP is a small handheld device that delivers electrical stimulation through electrodes that are placed over the skin, over the spine in specific areas.
And in terms of controls, how do you, control it? Turn it on, turn it off? Do you have to worry about the settings?
The device is actually being developed as a co-therapy. So SpineX therapy will be provided by a licensed pediatric physical therapist who will be providing physical therapy together with the stimulation. So it's intended as a device that will be a part of a regular physical therapy treatment process.
Very interesting. And from the user's perspective, can they feel anything? Do you feel currents going through the electrodes, or is it something that is just, the electrode's there, but you don't really sense anything because it's below your threshold?
So people that I've spoken with who have experienced SCiP therapy say that it feels like a little tingle on the skin. It does not feel painful. One person that I spoke with is a child who's received SpineX therapy, and she explained that it feels like it pulls her into the right position. one of the things that she said was when her mom would put her hand on her back to say, this is the area to focus on. She said, it feels like 1,000 hands are being placed there, so I know exactly where to move. I haven't experienced it myself, but I think it would be quite an interesting feeling.
Absolutely. And to give listeners a sense of what a therapy session with the SCiP device might look like, how many iterations do people go through, or how many sessions does it take, or how long are these sessions? What does that really look like?
The SpineX SCiP therapy protocol that we've been using so far in our pilot studies is 8 weeks long. So a patient would be involved in 8 weeks of physical therapy sessions with 2 one-hour sessions every week. And during those sessions, the therapist is going to apply the stimulation during what would be a regular activity-based physical therapy session. So the therapy will consist of activities like walking on a treadmill or practicing sit to stand activities or working on activities where a person would be on all fours. So various standard physical therapy activities, but provided with the stimulation. And so what we find then is that what's learned during those sessions when the stimulation is on can actually last a lot longer, where the improvements and functional gains that are gained during a physical therapy session last for several weeks or months after the therapy is completed. And an important point to note about SCiP therapy is that it is not stimulation that has to be on all the time. So a person would use the stimulation during a therapy session and only during a therapy session. And so when we have 8 weeks of treatments twice a week, outside of that, the person doesn't have to receive stimulation. So it does not have to be used all the time for a person to see the benefits of the treatment.
That's awesome, Kara. And that really helps us visualize the product and what treatment with it might look like. Now, to give our listeners some insight into the potential impacts here, what problems does this SCiP product solve?
Well, one of the challenges physiologically that can happen in cerebral palsy is that the messages between the brain and the body can get mixed up, or they may not travel clearly from the brain to the body to allow the person with CP to have voluntary movement. So what the product can actually do is we talk about it as if it's acting like a hearing aid for the spinal cord. So it can actually help to augment or improve the signals that you want to get through and cut down on the background noise so that people with CP will be able to move voluntarily on their own more easily than they could before.
Very cool. I really like that hearing aid metaphor. I think it helps people really understand how this is working. Now, who do you think could benefit from using this product?
Well, ultimately, we hope that this product will be able to provide benefit for people at all levels of CP. So there are a few different ways that we can measure how easily a person with CP can move. And the scale that we use in our studies is called the Gross Motor Function Classification Scale, or the GMFCS scale. And the GMFCS scale is a 5-point scale that goes from a level 1, which would be people who are the least affected by CP, to a level 5, which would indicate a person who has the most profound effects. So a person with a level 1 CP is likely to be able to walk, may have challenges with balance or walking on ground that's not level or going up and down stairs, where a person with a level 5 CP would be a wheelchair user and likely have difficulty with speech or head control. So at this time, we have done studies in several individuals ranging from a GMFCS level 1 all the way up to level 5, and ranging in age from 2 years old all the way up to adults who are in their 50s and even a 60-year-old person. And all of the people who have used the SCiP therapy have achieved some level of improvement. So we really do hope and believe that it's going to be able to help a wide range of people who have CP.
Absolutely. And I know people with CP may have different functions that they really want to focus on improving. Are there particular things that this SCiP, at least at this point, seems to be better at helping, or things that you really think it would be beneficial specifically for?
Well, the really cool thing about it is that it seems to be able to help people to improve their function at the level where they are. So we've worked with kids who were at a level 5 CP who were unable to roll over on their own or hold up their heads on their own. And SCiP therapy has helped them to be able to start rolling. So they're able to achieve some level of independence of movement at home. And we've also had some children just being able to regain or to gain better head control. And that's allowed them to be able to interact more with the world. And their families have found that to be just a huge difference and a huge improvement. And then we've also worked with kids on the other end of the spectrum. So children with a level 1 CP who initially had challenges with going up and down stairs, for example. And they've been able to go from one step at a time to being able to run up the stairs following a treatment course with SCiP therapy. So it really does seem to help to lock in the functional improvements that happen during physical therapy. So that's why we're developing it as a co-therapy and using it as a way to augment the physical therapy activities.
Oh, very cool. And I know that SCiP was developed specifically for children with CP, but do you think SCiP could also help adults with CP?
We do think so. So we have worked with some adults already in some of our case studies and pilot studies, and we have seen response in those adults. Now, because of the way that we're developing the product through FDA regulatory pathways, we do have to start somewhere. And so we've chosen to start with a pediatric population, just so that we can work with a population that's going to be the most neuroplastic and the most able to respond to the therapy. But we absolutely plan to move forward with post-market studies, working with adults, because one of the things that we've really learned as we've gotten to know more and more people in the CP community is that there's a huge challenge with people as they grow up and as they become adults with losing access or not having the same kind of access to treatment as they did when they were children. And so we absolutely want to develop this so that it will be available to help adults with CP.
Oh, I think that is amazing. And it sounds like for this product, it might be a little bit more flexible than some other products that are maybe developed specifically for children, like a robot that is of a specific size that will only fit kids. For this particular product, SCiP, are there things that you'd have to develop further in terms of the size of the electrodes or the stimulation parameters to allow it to potentially serve adults?
Well, I think that those will be some of the things we'll need to look at in some of those post-market studies. But at this time, our pilot studies show that we're having good success in the adults that we have worked with. Of course, we would need to do further studies in adults in those post-market studies to make sure that is the same across the board in a statistically significant sample. But we expect that it would be quite similar and that the way that we're developing the device should be transferable to adults with CP as well.
That makes sense. And it's good to hear that you don't have to sort of go all the way back to the drawing board to potentially have a device that works well for adults as well. So I think that is wonderful. And we talked about SCiP. Let's talk about SCONE next. So, Kara, what does the SCONE product look like and how does it work?
The SCONE product uses the same basic technology, but rather than cerebral palsy, we're targeting the SCONE product towards the treatment of neurogenic bladder in people who have had a spinal cord injury or multiple sclerosis or a stroke. So the product is a slightly larger stimulator, and it works in the same way in that it uses electrodes that are placed over specific regions of the spine to deliver stimulation to the nerves of the spinal cord.
Oh, very interesting. And is it the same thing where you sort of have a separate controller that you would then turn it off, turn it on, and set the settings?
Yes. So the SCONE product is also a prescription product, but it is not delivered with any kind of therapy. It's just delivered passively. So the person who's receiving this treatment would come into the clinic, would have the electrodes placed over specific regions of their spinal cord, and then would just remain in the clinic for 1 hour to receive the treatment. Again, this would be 1 hour twice a week for 12 weeks this time.
Very interesting. And it sounds like for this one, it's a relatively kind of hands-off therapy where the doctor could set it and not have to be monitoring every second or kind of walking the patient through any specific exercises. Is that correct?
It's a little bit more hands-off. So we're developing it right now to be available in clinic. But our next step is to develop the SCONE product to be available for home use. So we would hope to be able to train patients or their care team who work with them at home to be able to place the electrodes and deliver the therapy in that setting, rather than having people come into the clinic twice a week.
I think that's really exciting. And what problem does this specific product solve?
People who have had a spinal cord injury or who have had multiple sclerosis or stroke often have a disconnect between the brain and the part of the spinal cord where the bladder is controlled, and they lose the ability to control bladder function. So we're able to place electrodes over the regions of the spine that control bladder function. And as an added bonus, the same part of the spinal cord is responsible for controlling the bowel function and also sexual function. And so by providing stimulation to this area, we can improve symptoms of neurogenic bladder, which can reduce incontinence episodes. We can improve the ability of the bladder to store urine, so people can actually go for longer periods in between having to empty their bladder. And we can also see improvements in things such as urgency, which is one of the serious symptoms that people with neurogenic bladder would have, in that when they have to go right now. And so by treating neurogenic bladder using the SCONE device, we can reduce those feelings of urgency. And the other thing that we have seen when we've treated people with neurogenic bladder is that the sensation in the bladder sometimes returns. So people with a spinal cord injury or MS may not be able to tell when their bladder is filling. And after SCONE treatment, many people start to regain that ability to sense the filling of their bladder.
That's really cool. And similar to the SCiP device, is this something that requires continuous stimulation, or is it just like that one where it would be more of an intermittent use paradigm?
It's exactly the same as the SCiP device, in that people would use the treatment twice a week for an hour at a time. And we start to see after about 4 to 6 weeks of treatment, people start to see the improvements happening, and those improvements continue. And we find that by the end of 12 weeks, which is what our clinical trial protocol includes at this time, at the end of 12 weeks, people have seen clinically important improvements in their bladder function.
Well, those are really exciting results. And you touched on this a little bit previously, but just to remind our listeners, who do you think could benefit from using this product? And are there any age ranges specifically that you're looking at?
So right now we're looking at adults. We haven't used the SCONE product on children as of yet, but we're working on adults who have spinal cord injury. And with spinal cord injury, that can be anywhere from about a C3 level down to an L1 level in terms of where the injury occurred. And we're also including individuals who have anywhere from incomplete or complete spinal cord injury. We're also looking at individuals with multiple sclerosis, because about 65% of people who have MS will have neurogenic bladder as well, which is not necessarily as well known. And then we're also including individuals who have had a stroke, who have symptoms of neurogenic bladder as a result of that.
Well, that is phenomenal. It sounds like there are a lot of people with different conditions who could benefit from this product. So in terms of how it was developed, how did you and the team there at SpineX go about incorporating feedback or maybe perspectives from people with these different disabilities or conditions in designing the SpineX products?
So the SpineX products, as I mentioned before, came from deep laboratory research. And so we're actually in a process right now of understanding how we can take this amazing technology and translate it into products that are available and useful for people in the real world. So in order to do that, we've been talking with people as much as we possibly can. And this can include people who have the conditions that we're aiming to treat. So we've been talking to people who have CP. We've been talking to families who have family members with CP. We've been talking to people with neurogenic bladder due to spinal cord injury or MS or stroke. and just talking to them about their experiences with the available treatments on the market today. We want to understand from people, what have they tried and what has worked, and are they perfectly happy with that, or would they like to have something different? And what we've learned from all of the populations that we've spoken with is that they feel that there are unmet needs clinically in terms of the treatment that they're able to achieve and receive. So we want to continue to speak with people to learn even more about their treatment pathways and how they would see products like the SpineX therapies and treatments being incorporated into their treatment programs. And together with that, we're also, as we're developing a medical device, we also need to ensure that we are building the device so that it can fit into today's medical treatment paradigms for these conditions. So parallel to working with people who are going to ultimately be the recipients of the treatment, we're also working with the clinicians and the therapists who will be the people delivering or prescribing the treatment, so that we can understand what their practices look like and how these devices and treatments could best be incorporated into the way that they're already working today with people. Because we want to make sure that what we're developing is able to fit into the way that medical treatment works today.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important, Kara, that SpineX is thinking about both sides of the equations. They're not only developing something that works and that users are willing to use, but also something that the people in the clinic who have to deliver the treatment can use within their current constraints. So something that's feasible for use in the clinic. I think both sides are so important. So then how do the SpineX products differ from other products available on the market today?
Well, when it comes to CP, there really are no other products on the market that are able to treat the underlying cause of CP in the way that we can. Right now in CP, there are Botox injections into the muscles, which can help to reduce spasticity. Or there are invasive surgeries like selective dorsal rhizotomy surgery that can sever some of the nerves that are involved in spasticity in CP. Both of these are invasive and can cause long-term reductions in function potentially. And what we can do is a non-invasive treatment that can actually result in improvements that aren't really seen with any other treatments that are available on the market.
Oh, awesome. And what about for the SCONE product?
Well, for the SCONE product, similarly, the treatments that are available are not necessarily treating the underlying conditions. There are oral medications that can reduce incontinence in people who have neurogenic bladder, but they often have really severe side effects like dry mouth or worsening constipation that can be difficult for a person to handle. Or surgical interventions like insertion of a suprapubic catheter or bladder augmentation surgeries, which are very invasive and people often don't want to go down that road. So we're able to provide an option that can improve the bladder function without having to go down a surgical pathway.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like there are some exciting potential applications and people are likely looking forward to this product coming out. So let's talk about the future. Kara, what is the vision for the future of SpineX?
Well, right now we are just finishing up our clinical trial that will allow us to have FDA approval for our SCONE device so that we can enter the market. So we hope to have the SCONE product available on the market in late 2024 or 2025. And when it comes to the SCiP product for CP, we're planning to start our clinical trial for FDA registration and market clearance in early 2024. We hope to carry out a clinical trial for the CP product in 2024 and have the SCiP product available on the market in late 2025 or 2026. So our vision for the future of SpineX is that SpineX will be the treatment that people go to address these neurological conditions, and that will be able to help people who have these conditions to have a better quality of life.
That's wonderful. And it sounds like this is a really exciting time for SpineX with these two products moving down the pipeline. So if our listeners are curious and they want to learn more about you and more about SpineX and track all the progress, what is the best way for them to do so?
Well, you can always go to our website, which is www.spinex.co. And there you can learn about what we're actually doing and see some of our publications and some videos of people who have undergone SCiP therapy. And you can also contact us by email at info@spinex.co, or follow us on Instagram, or check us out on LinkedIn. And we would love to hear from anyone who's out there and interested in talking to us about their experiences and how they might see a product like this fitting into their lives. So you can contact us at that info@spinex.co, or you can even contact me directly at Kara, Kara, @spinex.co. And we'd love to have a chat with you.
Excellent. Well, listeners, definitely get connected with SpineX and reach out if you want to talk a little bit more in detail or ask questions. And Kara, thank you so much for joining us on the show to share your insights with me and our listeners today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure talking to you and to your audience. And thank you all for being here and for spending time listening to what we're doing.
It's been a pleasure. And listeners, now I am excited to introduce you all to our next set of guests, Jessica Van and Annika Oldham. They are going to share their experiences with SpineX. So welcome, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. We're excited to be here.
So am I. I'm excited to be here too.
Thank you for having us. It's great to be here.
Well, we are so glad to have all of you here with us today. And perhaps we can start off with you just telling us a little bit more about yourself and your family.
You bet. So we're the Oldhams. We've been married 17 years this past Saturday, September the 16th. So happy anniversary to us. We're kind of excited about that. We'd been married several years. When Annika and Eliana were born, they were twins. They're now 9. And then just a couple of years later, Hollis came along. She's 6. And then a few more years later, and Camille came along, who is 2, but just about to be 3 in a couple of days. I'm completely surrounded as the dad with 4 girls and a wife too. So I always tell people when they ask what it's like, I'm just like, there is so much emotion, so much emotion. I did not realize there was this much emotion in the whole world. And now it's like in my living room. So that's what it's like.
Oh, well, that is wonderful. Well, congratulations to you and your wife on your recent anniversary. And it sounds like you and the kids have quite a wonderful life together. And I'd love to talk about Annika specifically. Can you tell us a little bit more about Annika's cerebral palsy?
So Annika was diagnosed with cerebral palsy when she was a little over a year old. Cognitively, she is 100%. In fact, she's very, very intelligent based on tests that she's done and her reading level and all of those things. Annika's cerebral palsy, and as I'm sure that anyone listening to this will know, cerebral palsy is an ocean of diagnosis. It can be really wide spectrum. Annika's cerebral palsy is really combined mostly to her motor ability, and even then, it's mostly her gross motor ability. She does have a little bit of issue with writing and coloring and things like that, but it's very, very, very little. Most of it is in her legs and her ability to walk and to get around. She does walk. She walks with crutches most of the time, but now even that's a little bit better than it used to be.
Oh, that's really good to hear. And Jessica, is there anything that you'd like to add?
So I was going to add, Annika's cerebral palsy she's been diagnosed with spastic diplegia. I've been told by some of the rehab docs that she might have a little bit of dystonia as well, but mostly it's spasticity in her legs. And so she walks with crutches. She's in the past walked with a walker, and she uses a wheelchair for very long distances.
Wonderful. And Jessica, can you give us a little bit of information about how then you got connected with SpineX? How did you find out about the company and decide to get involved?
Honestly, it was kind of a fluke. I had been looking and been interested just about a week or two prior. I'd been thinking about studies, and I'd been trying to look on the website that has all of the national and international studies that are being done for cerebral palsy. And I got kind of disgusted and discouraged by the amount of ones that looked to be going, but then when I would get into the page, it wasn't updated and maybe it has already completed. And so I shut the computer, and 2 days later, I opened my computer up and I signed into Facebook. And there was on a mom's group for special needs kids, someone had said, have you guys heard about this SpineX study that's happening? And here's the criteria. And here's the email. So I emailed Kristen right away, right then. And I think maybe a week or so went by and I followed back up with her and I heard from her. She called me and she told me about it. And she told me about some of the preliminary results that they'd had in some earlier smaller studies. And when I'd realized it was in Los Angeles and the timeline of it, I would answer the phone with plans to turn it down. But after hearing her talk and her passion and also the preliminary results that they were seeing, I said, I can't turn it down. So I'm going to request a period of time. I'm going to talk to my husband for the next 24 hours and I'll get back with you. So I had mentioned to him about the study that it was happening and mentioned that it was going to be in Los Angeles. And he also had said, that's just not even something I think we can do. And when I told him about the conversation with Kristen, he said, I don't really see how we can say no to this. So we decided to go ahead and make the necessary changes with work and life in order to do a temporary move to California.
Oh, wow. Now you guys participated in a 16-week SCiP therapy session and then another session for 10 weeks later. So what was it like then moving to LA and then participating in this SpineX SCiP therapy intervention?
It was pretty wild. Several times over Annika's life, we looked at different studies and things like that. And it was just like Jessica said, it just never seemed like it worked out. There was some kind of issue for a while that we couldn't do it or whatever the case may be. And then honestly, when Jessica first mentioned it to me, I didn't really think a whole lot about it because I thought, oh, well, this will just be like that. It'll just fizzle out again. And then I came home from work and she was like, that thing in LA? I was like, yeah. And after that, it wasn't very long until we were packing bags and getting ready to go. And thank God we did.
Oh, that's amazing. So then, Jessica, what was your experience actually participating in this therapy trials?
So we were unsure, of course. We didn't know if Annika would be in the placebo group or if she was going to be in the actual group receiving the spinal stimulation. We were hoping, obviously, that we would be in the group receiving it the whole 16 weeks. But it was probably within 3 weeks or maybe even 2 that we were pretty confident that we were in the group that was actually receiving the stimulation because we saw an almost immediate improvement in her posture. Her gait was improved. She just walked straighter and taller. And by probably 4 weeks into the study, she was climbing stairs in a pretty typical looking pattern. She typically would, when she would climb stairs, she would have to turn sideways and face the rail. And she would do one stair with both feet and then the next stair. So she was able to, by about 4 weeks, face the stairs with the rail to her side, one hand on the rail. And then she was able to go up the stairs with a reciprocating pattern in a neurotypical way, in the way that you or I would climb stairs. So we were like, there's no way that she's not receiving it. It's just been an immediate change. So then, of course, we did find out at the end of the 16 weeks that she had been receiving it the entire time.
Oh, that's so exciting. And Annika, how did you feel after the SpineX therapy sessions?
After that, I felt wonderful. I felt very energetic afterward, and I just felt very flowable. I could walk downstairs and just feel like normal. And when I had the SpineX on, I could step, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off my foot.
Yeah, I remember one night. So it was actually towards the end. We saw little improvements. It wasn't like day one, she was doing everything, right? But she was showing improvements. And so it was towards the end and we'd been seeing a lot of improvements. But I was watching her walk across the therapy room with Kristen behind her. So Kristen was touching her hips and giving her a little tiny bit of support, but Annika was picking her foot up and doing a heel to toe gait, which was remarkable because even at her best, she would do maybe just a flat footed straight down gait. And then at her worst, she would be like toes first, kind of over, bent over. And all of a sudden I realized it. I was like, Annika, you are doing a heel to toe gait. And she was like, I know. And Kristen was also noticing it. So later we got out of the car and I was asking her about it because without the SpineX device on, she wasn't able to do the heel to toe gait. And so I was like, why are you able to do it with it on and why can't you do it with it off? And she said, I feel like that a weight has been lifted off my foot when I'm wearing it and it feels natural to do it.
Like it pulls me into place, right? You know what she said, Jessica?
A beautiful soft hand pulls you where you want it to go.
Aw.
Like, not a grasp of the one that says, do this right now. It's like a hand that's showing you where to go, like a light.
Yeah. So she had described it to me as the hand would grab her spine and pull it into place. So she would maintain alignment a lot better. She would sit a lot straighter. Her posture was improved with it on. And she said it was because it felt that something was pulling her and showing her how to do it.
Oh, that sounds absolutely poetic. I love it. This feeling of having this guiding hand helping you move a little bit better. So then what are, I guess, some of the types of impacts that you think these SpineX products could have for users thinking long-term and bigger picture?
I think that it could be certainly life-changing. If Annika was able to wear it, or if there was a way that she was able to use it throughout the day, and she could go from a gait pattern that causes her to be fatigued very quickly, which is more of a crouched position and toes first, to if she can go to a gait pattern that uses the correct muscles, and so she's going heel to toe gait pattern, more erect and using her glutes better. That would allow her to function independently, walking much longer throughout a day. So I just think it could be life-changing, and I'm super hopeful about the technology, and we're grateful to have been part of the pilot study, but I'm ready for it to be something available for us to use on a day-to-day basis.
100%. I feel the same way. I would also add that I continue to see Annika improve. We haven't had SpineX now in several months, obviously, and I still see improvements. Like just last Wednesday night when we went to church, our church has a Wednesday night meal, and you have to go downstairs to the basement to access the kitchen and all of that. And Annika has one hand on the handrail and one hand in my hand. We go down the stairs together, and that's usually how that typically works, which itself is an improvement over the way that it used to be. But just last Wednesday night, she just held the handrail and went down the stairs, and she's never done that before.
Oh, wow. Outstanding. And are there any other major changes that you've noticed since participating in the SpineX studies that you'd like to share with us all?
So Annika, before we went, when she was about 4 or so years old, a physical medicine rehabilitation doctor had told me that whatever Annika is able to do at about between 5 and 7 is the best that she'll ever be able to do. So basically saying, like, if she walks with a walker at 7 or 5, she's going to always walk with a walker. Or if she walks with crutches at that age, she will always walk with crutches. And I really found that to be absurd and upsetting, because what we know about neuroplasticity, plus now what we're learning about the spinal cord, and no other child in the world gets pegged at 7 for never improving, on anything. And I thought it was crazy. And so I have been really aggressive with, trying to do therapies at home. We do homeschool because of her therapy schedule. But what I was so excited about, with SpineX, is that when we went to SpineX, she was walking with 2 crutches pretty much all the time. So she had managed to not walk with the walker just for ease of getting around in like small spaces. She'd gone to crutches. But while we were there, she began to walk with just 1 crutch. And she pretty much consistently walks with just 1 crutch now. And then in our home, she began walking independently and almost never uses the crutches in the house anymore. She does like to go from kind of a furniture to furniture. She does crouch a little bit, so she doesn't stop herself really well. But she isn't relying on the aid to do that. She crouches with the crutches as well. And so the only difference now is that she's able to do it completely on her own, which is phenomenal and exciting. And it's allowed her so much more autonomy on getting around the house, or like at a library or somewhere. She kind of goes where she wants.
One thing I've noticed is that I can ride my bike. Before SpineX, I could not. But now I can ride my bike all the way up the hill and all the way down.
So one other thing, probably the biggest thing that I see as, wow, like this has just changed our life, is the fact that she's going up and down stairs independently. So she does hold onto the rail. And I mentioned that earlier when we were talking about it. But my mom and dad have a 2-story home. So when we were there over the summer, she just went upstairs to the bedroom, downstairs to play with the cousins. She never had to stop and wait and sit and yell. And I was a little more free too, to just be doing what I wanted to do, because I knew she could get up and down the stairs. And it's incredible.
Oh, that is remarkable. And I love that you're seeing these real life impacts in your everyday life. So thinking about who might benefit from this, do you have thoughts on what sorts of conditions this might help, or what people might benefit from using the products that SpineX is currently developing?
So just based on our experience, I think people with cerebral palsy obviously would benefit from it. But I wonder if there would be benefits to patients who have spina bifida, or if obviously, I know that the original plan with the SCONE, I believe it is, was with patients who had spinal cord injuries. So I think that there's a lot of hope for that. But our area of what we focus on and know most about would be cerebral palsy. But I think there's a lot of hope with anybody who's having issues. I mean, I think that when you've got a lesion in your brain that's causing the disability, if you can bypass that lesion, whether it's multiple sclerosis or ALS, I don't know. But I would wonder, is it something that we could bypass that lesion and work with the spinal cord to develop motor patterns? It's a really exciting possibility.
I wondered about people with strokes. Honestly, I have a friend here in town that's, I'd say he's about 15 years older than me, maybe 20. And he recently had a stroke last year, and it was a pretty bad one, but he was able to get back up and get back to work and everything was fine. But when I was talking to him, he said, I feel like I'm like 90%. Everything I do is 90% of the way it used to be. He was like, I don't think I'll ever go back to 100, but if I could get just 5 of those 10% that I lost, if I could just get 5 of that back, he said, there's nothing I wouldn't give for that.
Absolutely. I think that little extra boost of recovery and function and just being able to get back to normal can have a tremendous impact and can mean a lot for people. So you mentioned that you guys are excited about this technology. I guess, what are you most exciting about regarding the potential for this kind of technology in this space?
I often talk about or think about how when I was a kid, mid 80s, early 80s, people would not have ever imagined we could have carried a computer around in our pocket. And they were housed in these massive buildings and rooms. And now we carry around far greater computers in our pockets. And so I'm really excited and hopeful that as SpineX continues to grow and research and be innovating, I'm hopeful that it'll become something that will be small enough, convenient enough that she can just wear, that patients like her will be able to live a very typical life and use their bodies in the most functional way possible with a small device that can be hidden or worn on their body. It would just be phenomenal and life-changing.
Absolutely. And I know Kara sort of described it as almost like a hearing aid for the spine. And I think that analogy works really well with what you're describing here, where it's just sort of this discrete piece of your everyday life that you just kind of put on in the morning and forget about.
That was exactly what I was thinking when I was saying it. And I thought in my mind, I was imagining a hearing aid, but that is the exact analogy that I was thinking, that it's something that someone wears nowadays. A hearing impairment, it is difficult, of course, but we have ways of managing it. So I hope that with SpineX, that this will be the hearing aid for the body so that someday it will be a very easy, more or less fix medically for us to live as typical of a life as she wants.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you and your family have had a positive experience with SpineX. So what would you like to share with any listeners out there who may be interested in potentially trying SpineX's products once they are available?
I think that SpineX is, I don't really know how to explain it. It's like a lot of therapies I've done. I do a lot of things and they improve. But once I go away, I go back to normal. But SpineX is different. It's like, I can't do that today I was telling you about, but I can do other things that I know I wouldn't have been able to do before.
So would you recommend it to other people?
Absolutely.
I would say that what I feel like my experience in the world of dealing with non-neurotypical child is that there's not always a straight answer. It's like a puzzle and you're trying to solve it and you use different puzzle pieces that work together and you come together and you find the best things that, work for that child. But I feel like that SpineX is a huge puzzle piece in finding what she needs to do to live her best life.
I agree with that too. I think that is spot on. And for me, SpineX gave me hope. And I think that's really the thing that was the biggest thing for me. Like most of the time when you talk to medical providers, it's very black and white. And many times it just feels so hopeless. And with SpineX, it was like, maybe it'll get better. And when we talk about maybe it'll get better, it was like my friend with the stroke. I might not get all 10%, but even if I got 2 of them, that's better than where we're at right now. And man, the juice is worth the squeeze as far as that's concerned.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives today. It was wonderful to have all 3 of you here with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you again for your time. And listeners, it's been great to have all of you here with us as well. And when you have a moment, make sure that you are subscribed to our show on your favorite podcast platform. And we look forward to connecting again in another episode of Changing What's Possible.